The manhwa begins with soft echoes of moans drifting through the room. "My sweet Litty," he calls as traces up her earlobe with his tongue. Then he moves to her neck, each stroke warm and intimate, while she shivered under the heat of each stroke. Then he declares, "Every drop of your blood, it all belongs to me." He gently cups her face in his hand while she calls his name softly, "Evarista, my lord." His mouth widens as if to devour her, and without warning he drives his sharp fangs into her neck, sending a sharp jolt throughout her body. It doesn't take long before the block begins trickling down. A gentle gasp escapes her lips, her mind overwhelmed as she attempts to trace back to when it all began. The master of the vampire castle of Aristella Jews. Just being near those beautiful fangs, it's like she's drunk on the illusion of love, drowning in bliss. "I forget that I'm just a mere sacrifice." Some time ago, in Viscount Saxenidar's estate courtyard, the eldest daughter Lindy sits sipping a cup of tea. Her younger sister Michelle appears. Gazing down at her with mockery, she asks her why she's up. Litty in response explains that she'd felt a bit better, so she thought she'd come out for some fresh air. However, her sister just lets out a loud sigh. She points out that her skin's sick from the illness and her hair's completely frizzy. Lastly, she adds condescendingly, "I wouldn't even dream of stepping out of my room with such an ugly body. If it were me, I'd be way too ashamed." A flicker of sadness flashes in her eye before she turns away quickly, thinking, of course, she's well aware of how hideous she looks. For a year now, the eldest lady of the Saxenidar's ducal estate has been suffering from an unknown illness, constant dizziness, headaches, fatigue. Despite the treatment, she ended up spending almost all her time bedridden. Since she's fallen ill, she has had to take a leave of absence from the academy. She can't even focus on books anymore, and she used to love magic studies so much. But she doesn't want to give up. She still wants to find a cure and go back to school. She finally gives a response to her sister. She explains that if she were to just sit still, her body will get even weaker, so she insists she must maintain her strength as much as possible in case a cure is found someday. Her sister with a sneer then asks if even with so many doctors giving up on her she still maintains that resolve, noting it'd be smarter to remain locked up in her room than parade around in disgrace. Liddy's gaze softens and she doesn't. Instead, she can only recall how much her beautiful and kind sister Michelle used to admire her. She always looked up to her as her role model, but lately, it's like she hates me. She breaks into cold sweat afterward, her voice barely steady as she asks Michelle if she'd done anything wrong to her. She apologizes if there was anything she did, sharing her intention to really make peace with her. However, her sister just scoffs. Ticking her hair behind her ears, she boldly reveals, "You know, I've actually hated you ever since we were kids. I just played the role of the friendly little sister." In that moment all her thoughts shatter, but her sister only pushes forward. "Father, mother, all the boys at the academy. Even your fiancé Lord Clyde, I was in love with him first, but he was always obsessed with you. Everyone always footed on you and never even spared me a second glance. I bet deep down you've been laughing at how pathetic I am too, haven't you?" Immediately she speaks up to defend herself, assuring her she never thought that way, but before she can finish, Michelle cued her off. "But from now on, I'll be the one to steal your happiness. Just you wait." At the same time, a man approaches from the other side searching for Litty. Once her sister notices his presence, her lips curl into a smirk and she immediately turns to her sister saying, "Let me show you how it feels right now." In an instant she rips her cloth and throws herself down to the ground, a loud cry escaping her mouth as she crashes. The man's face goes pale. He rushes to them asking what had happened, and she immediately throws herself into his arms, putting on a pitiful act. She cries to him for help from her big sister, and without thinking he turns to Litty. His gaze that was soft a few seconds ago turns cold as he demands to know if she can explain what is going on there. However, seeing her sister's smug look on her face, she remains still, confused on what is happening. Her eyes flicker with disbelief as she calls him Lord Clyde, but before she can even put her words together, her sister interrupts. She explains that sister suddenly yelled at her, warning her to stop trying to seduce him, saying maybe she didn't like that he gave her a pendant the other day. Clyde, unsuspecting, simply calls her name in a low voice before he snaps. He asks if she's become not only ugly in appearance but in heart as well. To suspect the relationship between I and Michelle is one thing, but to attack her out of jealousy is crossing the line. Her breath catches at that moment as the feeling of her whole world crumbling creeps in her head. She hurriedly denies it, trying to explain herself, but he doesn't pay her any heed. Then he reveals even before that ever since her illness, her pitiful appearance has been unbearable. Pitying you and continuing this relationship was a mistake. The formal process will follow, but, as of today, I hereby annul our engagement. As he leaves with Michelle, she cries in the distance, explaining that she hadn't attacked Michelle, pleading for a chance to clear up the misunderstanding. However, the chilly air triggers her illness. But still, clutching her chest tightly, she pleads for him to wait. She could still recall that young boy with a flower in his hand assuring her they'll always be together. But now, she drops to her knees sobbing, as she watches the man who made that promise leave hand in hand with her younger sister, who until this day she had no idea she always hated her. Her parents weren't any different. They mentioned contracting some strange illness was already a disgrace to the Xenidar family, and now with the news of her annulled engagement, they are only more disappointed. The only silver lining is that Lord Clyde took a liking to Michelle, but to raise your hand against her sister, even as my own daughter, that is unforgivable. Despite how much she tried to explain everything to her mother and father, they didn't believe a single word she said. Some days later, the annulment of the engagement was officially finalized, and at the same time, Michelle became the fiancée of Count Clyde Series. However, what happened to her didn't end there. Her family suddenly appeared in her room, and her father, dumping some documents onto her, announced that her future had been decided. Starting tomorrow, you are to go to the Vampire Duke. Theses are the necessary documents. Stuck in disbelief, she asks her father what that was, but her mother only says she must have heard of Évariste de la Juse, the lord of the vampire castle. The great noble who protected the empire from the enemy's nation sorcery, and as a consequence became an immortal vampire. Commonly referred to as the failed Arouse mission, around 300 years ago, the Ruse Republic launched an invasion on the Kingdom of Flame using magic and curses. But within 2 weeks all their attacks were repelled and the kingdom emerged victorious. It was a historic event. At the time, to protect the royal family and the nobility, a young sorcerer named Évariste de la Juse took on all the curses in their place. It's written in several old theses on magical history, but many citizens of the kingdom were unaware of his achievements. She had often heard his name in rumors whispered through high society, as a cruel figure who feasts on the blood of beautiful women and once bored of them violates and kills them. Her father calls her naive as he explains that even without that monster the kingdom would have won. He insists no good came from them, forcing him to participate in the war, noting he's just a vile villain who has been trying to gain favor. Confused, she asks her father what that means, recalling the papers did mention the royal family requested his participation in the war. Her father continues, revealing as proof, he continues blackmailing them indefinitely, stating in the name of repaying the debt from the war he demands they go find offering sacrifices. The nobles who are said to have been saved by the Vampire Duke make a rotational pact every 10 years, offering their daughters as sacrifices. And Litty, you have been chosen as the next sacrifice. Then her sister chimes in, her words heavy with resentment as she reveals there was a tradition that the second daughter will be chosen, but since she's already worthless as a woman, the noble assembly agreed unanimously. She tells her even if she's afflicted by an illness she still remains a virgin, so it's not an issue. Her sister pushes on with his mockery, stating he supposedly prefers the blood of beautiful young women, but what can they do about her? They'll just have to use makeup with her. She doesn't contend her fate any longer. Instead she asks about the academy, mentioning how she promised she could return once she recovered. Her father just lets out a lazy sigh and discloses afterward that he's already submitted her letter of withdrawal. Even if you recover, why would I pay for the tuition of a useless burden who's had her engagement broken off? At that moment, a soft chuckle slips from her sister's lips, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her mouth as she calls her pathetic, voice laced with heavy mockery. She tells her she and Clyde will be happy where she can't reach them, advising her to throw away her filthy lingering attachment as soon as possible. Goodbye, sister, forever. A month later, she rides in a carriage on the mountain path leading to the vampire castle. She sits in the carriage, her mind unsettled as she struggles to imagine what cruel fate awaits her at the palace. But she clings to a new resolve. Instead of being rejected by her family or Clyde, being a sacrifice and serving the vampire duke might be a better fate. Just then the carriage coach informs her they've arrived and she steps out. Looking forward, she beholds the sight of the vampire palace. She notices a bat flying toward her, and once it draws near, it unexpectedly shifts into the form of a maid. Before she can fully process what just happened, the maid welcomes her to the palace and introduces herself as Mia, a servant of Duke of Aristelaus, adding that she'll be guiding her to her master's chambers. Her earlier suspicion and tension vanish in an instant, replaced by relief as she thanks the maid, following quietly behind her before breaking the silence after a while. She asks if she can ask her something and the maid agrees. Without wasting time, she asks her if she's able to use transformation magic, but the maid simply responds saying no, her change wasn't magic. She drops it like a bomb, revealing the bat form she saw earlier is actually her true form. Lost, she asks her what she means, and the maid explains that she was originally just a bat, until her master, the Duke, used magic to allow her transform into a human. Litty, terrified, can only manage a simple, "What?" Shaking all over her body, she ponders. To permanently transform both the soul and body of an animal. It's unbelievable. Even high-level mages from the royal family or the standing army would find such magic difficult. She struggles to comprehend it, but she can't overlook the fact that if it's true, it would explain why the kingdom has faithfully adhered to the pact for 30 years. A few minutes later, the maid brings her to the Duke, who remains seated on the couch, his hands supporting his head. Just as she observes the Duke's sharp features, another bat transforms into a man. He greets her with a graceful bow, as he says they've been expecting her. Then straightening up, he meets her eyes and adds smoothly, a faint smile playing on his lips as he introduces himself as her personal attendant, Roa. He calls the Duke and informs him of the lady's arrival, and for the first time since her arrival he lifts his head, revealing his piercing red eyes. Litty? Startled, she snaps her head up instinctively, however she quickly lowers her head when a thought comes to her mind. He's a person who loves drinking the blood of beautiful women, so I'm sure I'm not enough to satisfy him. But an even more terrifying thought flashes in her mind. If what she heard is true, it's only natural that he harbors hatred towards the royal family and nobility. I might be treated worse than I was told. She greets the Duke, her gaze lowered as she introduces herself as Litty's Exenadar. The Duke, who looked somewhat uninterested in her, suddenly looks up at her, his gaze soft. He closes in on the distance between them in an instant, his hand caresses her face as he murmurs, "You are." She looks at him, clueless, his gaze still lingering on her with quiet intensity. The next moment, her cheeks flush pink as her mind spins with questions, trying to make sense of what's suddenly unfolding, but he only smiles at her, calm and unreadable. He pulls away with an apology saying it's nothing and afterwards introduces himself to her. He gestures toward the seat, inviting her to sit, however she hesitates, starting to protest with a quiet but he gently cuts in. His eyes soften as he admits he's been feeling unwell, adding that it would help if she could just sit with him for a moment and talk. Her hesitation shifts into concern as she catches the paleness in his face, but even so, she can't help but notice his concern for her even over his own condition. She finally agrees and goes to sit beside him, addressing him as Lord Lajus. Catching her completely off guard, he suddenly mentions there's no need to be so formal, saying that from now on, this place is her home too. Then, he adds, "And please, call me Evariste, not Lajus," and she complies. A moment later, her attendant enters with the tea. Without delay, the Duke asks Roa and Mia to step outside, saying he wants a word with Litty alone. Silence settles in the room until Roa suddenly breaks it. Parting his lips, he calls out to the Duke, who responds without hesitation. This time, he tells him not to show mercy to the sacrifice, he must take exactly the amount of blood he needs. The Duke responds immediately, warning Roa to stop spouting unnecessary things, but the maid cuts in, siding with him. She points out it's always the same, he spares the sacrifices, never taking enough blood, and in the end, it's his health that deteriorates. Finally, he snaps, saying that's enough and that he'll handle it from here. His voice remains calm as he orders them to leave, and this time, they obey without a word. The moment they take their leave, Litty doesn't waste time and asks if he was indeed releasing sacrifices without draining their blood. She asks if he can tell her more about it, and he responds saying it's no big deal. According to the Duke, the sacrificial system for the blood-sucking castle was originally revised for a temporary shelter for noble daughters who wanted to escape from political marriages, it seems. The daughters were supposed to offer their blood as a thank you, but there were many daughters who in a state of near madness from fear ran away, so in recent decades they were quickly released. Even though it meant there wasn't enough blood and it made his health worse, the Duke still didn't hesitate. The Duke reveals Roa and Mia were worried about him and spoke about how they managed to take some blood but they never intended to take it. He asks her to leave if she wants, adding that he'll prepare her a carriage, assuring her not to be scared. As a response, she simply calls his name. Her gaze lingers on him and her thoughts grow. Now looking at him, she's unable to believe he's rumored to be a monster. Even though his complexion looks so bad, he didn't take advantage of the daughters who became sacrifices, and he's even being so kind to her despite her appearance. She takes a break from her thoughts and actually speaks. She thanks him for his offer, however she declares sharply afterwards that she's prepared. Then she discloses how she's contracted an unknown disease, so it seems unlikely that she'll be able to fulfill her duties as a noble. Even so, she explains that she heard that she might be of help to him and traveled for 3 days and nights to get to his manor. So please, accept my blood. His gaze softens as he says her name, Litty, his voice carrying an unexpected warmth. And before she can fully process his tone, her own voice slips out, trembling at the edges. Or perhaps, are you dissatisfied with a woman as ugly as me? Immediately, he takes her trembling hands in his, firmly declaring that such a thing is impossible. His gaze holds hers, steady and unwavering, as he tells her, she isn't ugly at all, in fact, you are very beautiful. His words stir something deep within her. To think he'd say that to someone like her, a mere sacrifice. He truly is a kind person. Her lips curl into a smile as she speaks, saying if that's the case, I have no home to return to, so please, let me fulfill my duties as a sacrifice. He agrees, and a sudden wave of excitement rushes through her, her eyes sparkling with joy as she thanks him. But that just makes him more curious. He tells her he should be the one thanking her. Then slowly, his lips curve into a smile, just before the words quietly leave his mouth. Thank you, you're so kind. Reaching for her face, he assured her he will do his best to avoid causing her pain, swearing he will only take blood within a range that won't endanger her life. Please trust me, and allow yourself to surrender. He brushes her hair aside, slow and deliberate, exposing the curve of her neck. Then he leans in, his breath warm against her skin, and without hesitation, drives his fangs into her flesh. His eyes snap open, his pupils dilate, glowing with feral hunger. Biting into her neck, he reflects on how he'd heard the rumors, but her blood is even more exquisite than he imagined. It's unbelievably delicious that a realization hits, so her illness is really what he'd suspected. He found her scent so dangerously tempting that he can hardly restrain himself. And for her it's a different experience. Surprisingly, she doesn't feel any pain at all. Instead, she feels so light. I've never felt anything so pleasant. Wrapped in his arms as he drinks from her, a soft moan escapes her lips, so sudden it startles the Duke into stillness. Embarrassed, she quickly covers her mouth, unsure if that sound had truly come from her, while the Duke, his head still resting against her neck, calmly asks if it hurt. She denies it immediately, scrambling for words as she explains that she hadn't felt any pain. After a brief hesitation, she finally confesses, it was just that, she just couldn't hold back her voice. She offers a sincere apology and the Duke, clearing his throat, tells her there's no reason to apologize, adding that everyone reacts the same way when they're bitten. She returns to her seat and asks him to continue, but he refuses, saying he'll wait. Gently, he adds that she must be tired from the long journey, suggesting they continue tomorrow, or later, but then she suddenly speaks. She explains that she doesn't know why, but she feels lighter than before and doesn't even feel tired anymore. In a calm tone, Simiki remarks that he sees. Then with his hand supporting his jaw he mumbles some words. It might actually be hemato-magic overload syndrome. He gets up the next moment, agreeing to take up her offer, but with a condition that they change locations. He outstretches his hand to her, asking her to come with him, and she agrees. Then without warning he sweeps her off her feet, but his surprises doesn't end there. Using a teleportation magic, he moves them from the parlor into the bedroom. Litty quietly notes his use of teleportation magic, impressed by how effortlessly he cast it, without even chanting, but he offers a soft apology instead, in case it started her. Then as he gently lays her on the bed, he explains that since she seemed anxious about her voice, he thought the bedroom might feel more comfortable than the parlor. Then he gets right back to it, leaning in closer, his breath warm and slow against her skin. The moment his fangs sink into her neck, a soft moan escapes her. This time, she doesn't hold it back. After a short while, he pulls away, gently reminding her to tell him immediately if it ever becomes too much. Then, without giving her time to respond, he goes in for another bite, his arms wrapped securely around her as he softly calls her name. That night, she was overwhelmed by the entirely new sensation and clung tightly to him. A week later, the Duke informs Litty of arrival. Litty appears immediately, almost as if she'd been waiting just to welcome him, her complexion quickly restored. She notices his pale complexion and her heart sinks deep in worry as she wonders if perhaps he's feeling unwell. She glances down and notices an injury on his hand, immediately calling his attention to it, but he says it's nothing, stated how the cleanup after a mission from the royal family or standing army is always messy, it's always like this. In response, a small remark slips from her lips, that's awful, as her gaze lingers on the wound. Even with a vampire's healing, it's still not fully closed, and she can't ignore the thought that if he were human, it would have likely cost him his hand. Her chest tightens as a question lingers in her mind, and this happened all the time? How much pain he must have endured, just imagining it. Faced with the gentle smile on the Duke's face, her cheeks flush a deep red, and she quickly resolves to break the silence. Please recover quickly, here, take as much as you need. Don't hold back, okay? The Duke takes her hand, and as he presses a kiss to it he thanks her and then asks, even now? To which she responds with a sharp, yes. Later, she lays underneath the Duke in his bedroom, and as his sharp fangs pierce her skin, a soft moan slips out of her mouth. She goes red from embarrassment as she thinks of how, even now, her voice still slips out. Now she can't help but question, why? Even though he's been taking her blood every day for the last week. Instead of getting used to it, it's only getting worse. Again, another moan slips out, this one even worse than the last, that she can't help but cover her mouth in embarrassment, hoping to stop the following that might slip out, but the Duke suddenly stops. She asks him if he's finished already, and he says yes, thanks to you I feel so much better. He slips his hand under her head as he asks how she's feeling, pointing out how she appears even healthier now, compared to when she arrived. She responds immediately saying yes, sharing how she even felt well enough to spend the whole day reading in the library he showed her. Her lips curl into a smile as she reveals, strangely enough, it feels like she's getting better with each passing day, but the Duke's response is unexpected. He simply retorts that he sees, claiming now he's sure of it. Then he explains that the illness that's been troubling her must be hemato-magic overload syndrome. He continues, stating it's a disease where the body produces an excess of blood infused with magic power which causes dizziness and fatigue. He adds that since there are so few cases, it's no surprise that they couldn't diagnose it until now, saying only a doctor familiar with magic and sorcery could recognize it. However, she remains confused, explaining how she can use neither magic nor sorcery, and to say magic power, but the Duke cuts her off and clarifies that the illness strikes people who possess enormous magic power but have no way to release it. He explains that it's an extremely rare condition, but her symptoms align perfectly, sending her into deep thought as she begins to wonder if that means she's going to be stuck like this forever. The Duke suddenly reaches for her hand, assuring her not to worry. He tells her she wouldn't have to suffer from her symptoms anymore, and when she asks why, he reveals it's because my feeding will serve as your treatment. She stares at him, even more confused now, so he tries to explain it simpler to her. He brings up how she feels better every time he drinks her blood, then he reveals it is said that removing magic power and blood simultaneously can heal the sickness. Also, he adds that it'll be impossible without magic treatment naturally, but with a vampire's fangs, it's entirely natural. You'll be stuck with me feeding on you for life, and you'll still need periodic medical checkups. But from now on, you'll be able to live without fearing your illness. His expression suddenly shifts when he sees Litty already on the verge of tears. He calls her name, concern flickering in his voice, but she quickly apologizes. As she wipes her tears, she confesses she had believed she'd never recover, and now, she's simply overwhelmed with happiness. A soft smile spreads across the Duke's face, then he places his hand softly on her head. Patting her head gently, he mentions it must have been so painful losing her future without even knowing why. But you don't have to face it anymore, you have me. She calls his name softly as he gently pats her head. Caught in the tenderness of the moment, she leans in without thinking, drawn to him. But just as their lips are about to meet, she suddenly pulls back. Embarrassed, she turns her head away and offers a quiet apology, struggling to process what she had almost done. But he simply waves it off, telling her not to worry about it. In fact, he goes on to say that for someone her age, she's been remarkably composed. Even in that moment, he can see how hard she's trying to stay strong, despite everything. But he doesn't stop there. He admits, almost guiltily, that he knows it's selfish of him, but seeing her cry like a child brought him a strange sense of relief. He mentions he heard she was a dedicated, brilliant student, but her illness forced her to leave school. Even so, despite her limited conditions, she stayed strong and never gave up on learning. In a calm voice, she quickly denies his compliments, saying it's not true. She discloses leaving school was a terrible shock, but if her health gets better, maybe someday she would return, but the Duke quickly cuts her off. Litty, about that, I have something I must apologize for. Then he drops the news on her. Sacrifices are erased from the palace records, that is why you can't be enrolled at any national institution again, and naturally, re-enrollment will be impossible. He explains that the people of the kingdom have hated him from the very beginning, so even she as a mere sacrifice could easily become the target of their hatred. In other words, he includes it means she can't even walk around the kingdom alone anymore. He whispers a soft apology, saying just when a cure for her illness had started to come, because of him, but she interrupts, yelling aloud, no. She mentions she's deeply grateful to him, that even thanking him doesn't seem enough. Besides, thinking of how she was abandoned by her family, she realizes even if she recovers she might never be able to return to school. Even if it was possible compared going back to a house that no longer accepts her, she decides studying there will be far better. Her expression shifts in an instant as she apologizes for speaking out of turn, but she shares that she doesn't believe attending an academy is absolutely necessary. She pushes forward, saying, the number of books in his library alone rivals that of the academy, and since she's allowed to read them freely it makes her really happy. In response, he tells her he's glad to hear that she enjoys them. However, he mentions when she runs into a problem she can't solve on her own it might be difficult. She simply brushes it off, although appreciating the concern. She replies that that's exactly why she feels the need to develop the ability to research and solve problems on her own. The Duke, however, insists. He explains that while her enthusiasm for learning is admirable, it's still quite inefficient. So, how about I become your teacher? That's what I wanted to say. He tells her he's never taught anyone before, but he's lived far longer than most humans, so he's confident he can answer most of her questions, especially when it comes to magic, the subject she's so passionate about. She thanks him for his kindness, however she mentions she's sure he has many duties from the standing army, so she wouldn't dare to make trouble just for lessons, but he just tells her it's fine. He says he only receives requests like that days once or twice a month. Dado buys duties as an official are flexible enough that he can make time. Despite his attempt to convince her, she still hesitates, prompting him to clear his throat and make a last statement. He assures her that he wouldn't force her, of course, and almost immediately she quickly clarifies that she hadn't meant to refuse. In fact, she mentions it'll be an honor to be taught by someone so skilled in magic like himself, and he just flashes her a smile in response. And just like that, it's settled. He tells her he has some free time tomorrow morning, suggesting they work on her study plan together, and she thanks him. After that, her health steadily improved and she was able to study every day. The Duke also kept his promise to become her teacher. He gave her so many dresses and accessories that she couldn't possibly wear them all, and in the end she was so grateful she felt even a lifetime wouldn't be enough to repay him. And slowly the thought of how well she's treated here compared to how badly she was treated in that house seeps in, and she quickly dismisses it, reminding herself not to forget her place, she, who was offered up as a sacrifice. In a new scene, the Duke tutors Litty in the quiet library, his voice steady as he guides her through the material. But just as she begins to answer a question, a sudden rumble from her stomach breaks the silence. She quickly apologizes, flustered, but the Duke seizes the moment to check his watch, only to realize it's already noon. He suggests they head out for lunch. Just then, a knock comes at the door and Roa steps in, informing him that Lord Julius has arrived. The Duke, with no change in expression, remarks that he thought Julius was out of the kingdom, prompting Roa to repeat the message as it was delivered. "Surprise!" is what he said. He turns to Litty and asks if she'd like to come with him, and though hesitation lingers in her eyes, she quietly asks if it's really okay. The Duke responds with a reassuring smile, saying of course, it's something he's actually been meaning to do for a while now, as there's someone he's been wanting to introduce her to. A few minutes later, the Duke enters with Litty by his side. Julius, already seated with a teacup in hand, looks up and offers a polite smile, apologizing for dropping by without notice. The Duke simply replies that it's not a problem, then asks if Julius isn't supposed to be in a ruse for his research. Julius nods, saying he was actually meant to head back that very day but found himself with a bit of free time. His gaze shifts to Litty and he finishes his sentence, so he thought to come and meet her. She introduces herself immediately, and Julius, keeping his eyes on her, mentions that he's heard a lot about her from the Duke, adding that he even asked for his opinion on becoming her personal doctor. She turns to the Duke in confusion and he explains that Julius is an expert in both medicine and magic and is also a researcher at the Institute of Magical Diseases, so there's no one better suited than him. Magical diseases refer to all illnesses caused by magic power, such as hematomagic overload syndrome. Due to the difficulty of curing magical diseases, the kingdom established a research institute a few years ago. The Duke breaks the brief silence, revealing that while her symptoms have stabilized thanks to his feeding, it would still be best for her to undergo regular checkups, just to be safe. Instead of responding, she falls silent, almost as if caught in a daze. Her eyes drift toward the Duke, and in that quiet moment, she finds herself thinking about just how much he cares for her. It leaves her unsure of what to do. The feeling in her chest tightens once more, but not from fear or pain. She's so happy, it's almost overwhelming. I want to say thank you, but I don't know how to express it. Her gaze lingers on the Duke a little longer than it should, as if she's completely forgotten Julius is even there. Sensing the shift, Julius quickly steps in to break the silence, asking if he may take a blood sample right away. He explains that he'd like to bring it back to the institute for further examinations. Julius brings out a strange-looking piece of equipment, immediately catching the Duke's attention. He narrows his eyes and asks what it is, and Julius, smiling without hesitation, explains that it's a newly developed special lancet. He goes on to describe its features. It's designed to extract both blood and magical power simultaneously, allowing for a more precise assessment of patients suffering from hematomagic overload syndrome. Then, turning to Litty, he gently tells her it'll feel like a small prick and asks if she's all right with it. With clear certainty in her voice, she responds loudly, saying yes and asking him to please go ahead. Julius gets straight to it. Once he extracts a small amount of her blood, he checks in with her to see if she's feeling unwell, but she assures him she's perfectly fine. With a nod, he says he'll take his leave. They exchange brief goodbyes, and the Duke adds a casual remark, asking him to stay longer next time. As Julius walks away, he mentions that in 2 weeks, he'll return to the manor to share the results of her examination. In a new scene at the Institute of Magical Diseases, Julius wraps up his research with a tired sigh escaping his lips. But the mood shifts in an instant. He lifts the vial horizontally, his eyes snapping open with an unsettling gleam as he murmurs, almost like a madman, that it's amazing. Hunched over the table, his lips curl into a smug grin as he mutters to himself, with this. A vivid image of the Duke and Litty flashes through his mind, but whatever thought follows is left unfinished, hanging in the air like a secret he isn't ready to reveal. On the other hand, Litty thanks the Duke that night, but he only apologizes for keeping her up so late. With a hint of resignation in his voice, he admits that even after all these years, he still can't tolerate sunlight, which is why he can only go out at such late hours. But she quickly brushes off his concern, her eyes lighting up as she says the antique bookstore he took her to was incredible. Glancing at her with a soft smile, he says he's glad she enjoyed it, adding that he's always loved that place too. And again, she falls silent, her thoughts now caught on the gentle smile on his face. Her mind drifts back, recalling how he felt sorry that she couldn't go out, so he took her on a quiet walk. Not just that day, but ever since she arrived, he's treated her with such constant, overwhelming kindness that it frightens her. But even in the warmth of those memories, she reminds herself once more, she mustn't forget her place, as a sacrifice. The Duke glances at her, checking to see if she's all right, since it's her first time outside the city. But she reassures him with a bright smile, saying that even though it's her first time stepping out of the house in a year, she actually feels energized. He responds warmly, telling her that whenever she wants to go out again, he'll be there to accompany her. But just as she steps into the carriage, a figure standing off to the side catches sight of her, her sister, Michelle, frozen in shock. Michelle struggles to believe the man beside her is truly the infamous vampire Duke. She's never once heard of him being this handsome. Her gaze shifts to Litty, and her expression twists in irritation as she takes in the elegant dress and jewelry she's wearing. Even from a distance, it's obvious they're all expensive, luxury pieces, despite the fact that Michelle had made sure to take all the valuables before Litty was thrown out. Her hands begin to tremble, teeth clenched in growing rage as a single thought sears through her mind. Being escorted like that, isn't she supposed to be a sacrifice? Just then, Clyde appears beside her, asking what's wrong. She quickly turns to him with a pleasant smile, brushing it off and saying it's nothing. But the act doesn't last long, her mask begins to crack as the anger bubbling beneath the surface spills over. I thought I had already sent her to hell, so why does she still look so much happier than me? Her eyes burn with resentment. Just wait and see, sister. I won't let this slide. Days passed, and then came the day of the examination by Lord Julius. But before that, an unexpected visit occurred. Her sister Michelle appeared in the manor. Litty stood facing her, confusion and unease on her face, cold sweat forming as she asked why she was there. But Michelle only apologized for showing up so suddenly. Standing there, Litty couldn't help but question why. She remembered clearly how Michelle had once said she hated her. Mia quickly noticed her expression, the way she bit her lip, and leaned in with a whisper, asking if she shouldn't let her inside. But Litty turned to her with a bright smile and an apologetic tone, saying it's okay and she's sorry for making her worry. After receiving her confirmation, Mia led Michelle straight to the living room, where she gracefully introduced herself to the Duke as the second daughter of the Xenadar family. The Duke introduced himself as well, immediately bringing up that she had said there was something she wanted to tell him. And just like that, the careful act Michelle had built up began to crack. She agreed, saying he was right, but before speaking further, she turned to her sister and suggested it might be better if she left the room. Closing her eyes gently, slipping into a pitiful act, she added softly, "Because I think you'll be very embarrassed." Litty's face goes pale, her body stiffening at the words. The Duke glances at her in silence, reading her expression carefully before turning back to Michelle. His tone calm but firm as he asks, "If Litty would be embarrassed, then what's the point of telling me this?" But Michelle, still holding on to her arrogance, extends her hand to the side. As a paper is placed into it, she calmly says he'll understand once he sees that. The next minute, Michelle unfolds the paper on the desk, laying it out with deliberate ease. Terror flashes in Litty's eyes the moment she sees it, her face draining of all color. With her chest tightening, she can barely manage to speak, only asking, in a strained voice, "Where did you get all of this?" Michelle answers without hesitation. She says the images were sent to her by someone named Finn Artois, who claimed to be Litty's ex-lover. Then, turning to the Duke with a composed yet sharp gaze, she says she's heard he prefers the blood of pure girls, but she suspects there's a possibility her sister has already been tainted, and that's why she came to him. Litty immediately reacts, her voice rising, "Artois? Why?" The Duke behind her calmly asks if she knows him and she says yes, revealing they were classmates. "But I never showed myself like that to anyone." Looking at Michelle, she slips into thought, wondering how things turned out this way. She thought Michelle was engaged to Clyde and living happily, so why is she spreading lies like this now? "I've already lost my family and fiancé, what more does she want from me?" Then it hits her, she remembers the day her engagement was called off. Michelle's words to her, "From now on, I'll be the one to steal your happiness, just you wait." She bites her lip, cold sweat already forming, her eyes empty and heavy with sadness as memories of her time with the Duke quietly slip in. "My life with Lord Evariste, does she want to take that from me too?" Outside her thoughts, Michelle continues, her lips curled into a mocking smile as she calls it strange, claiming that Artois confessed to it himself that Litty had been intimately involved with him since the moment she first entered school. And this is his rough draft. Litty immediately denies it, her voice loud and desperate as she says it's not true at all, while her sister, already smiling in quiet accomplishment, simply thinks to herself, "Of course it isn't. All of this is just that stalker's imagination." The Duke finally speaks up, his voice calm as he says that even if the materials truly came from a man named Finn Artois, that alone can't be used as evidence, because for all they know, it could simply be a product of his imagination. Michelle stands, twisting her lips to the side in frustration as she thinks to herself, any normal man would have exploded if provoked like that, but that monster remains completely calm. "Then how about this?" A smirk tugs at the corner of her lips as she points to the painting and asserts that there's indeed a mole in a place like that. He surely wouldn't know about it unless they'd been intimate before, right? And in that moment, Litty feels completely cornered, panic rising in her chest as a single thought races through her mind, what? How could Artois know about that? Michelle stares at her with a grin, thinking how ridiculous she looks right now. She scoffs inwardly, amused at how she didn't even know she had a mole there. Truly, she thinks, she should be grateful to that stalker. Then she speaks, her tone cold and certain, saying that now Litty can no longer deny it. She asks if she really did have a relationship with Finn, but Litty stands firm, her voice steady as she insists she already told her, she did no such thing. But Michelle, her face smug, leans in slightly and says, "Then how about you take off your clothes right now? If there's no mole in the same spot as the painting, I'll believe in your purity." Michelle keeps that triumphant look plastered on her face, while Litty lowers her gaze, her eyebrows furrowed in sadness as a single thought presses heavily on her. What a vile accusation, but I have no way to prove it. What should I do? Outside her spiraling thoughts, she hears Michelle's voice again, sharp and impatient, urging her to hurry. Her voice catches in her throat as she mutters, Lord of Ariste. I. But before she can finish, her eyes catch him seated calmly on the couch, holding the painting in his hand. Then, he calls Michelle. Michelle's eyes widen in confusion, only for them to reflect the sight of the painting burning right in front of her. The Duke now stands, the ripped canvas of flame in his grasp. As she stares at the burning painting, a wave of terror crashes over her. Then comes his voice, cold, steady, his piercing red eyes fixed on her as he asks. Is that all you came here to say? In an instant, all the paintings Michelle brought go up in flames. She stands frozen, terrified, unable to comprehend what's happening. How? Her mind races. He can use such powerful magic without as much as chanting. That's not normal. Before she can make sense of it, the Duke suddenly appears right in front of her, closing the distance in a blink, causing her to stumble back in fear. With flames flickering in his hand, his voice cuts through the tension as he tells her to listen to his judgment. Tears well up in her eyes, panic taking hold as she whirls around, yelling monster. But before she can flee, a towering wall of fire erupts around her, sealing off every escape. Behind her, the Duke's voice echoes, cold and unyielding. Don't move. I told you to listen, didn't I? She trembles, tears settling in her eyes, the smug look she once wore completely erased, now replaced by sheer horror and fear, as she manages to whisper a shaking yes. The Duke's gaze sharpens, his voice cold and merciless as he declares that she's committed an unforgivable sin. He reminds her that after disgracing Lady Litty, she went so far as to twist lies into so-called evidence with that painting. You've truly underestimated me, he says, his tone like ice. Did you really think I'd fall for the tricks of a human like you? Her face drains of all color as the weight of the moment crashes down on her, panic overtakes her and she pleads desperately for forgiveness. The Duke steps forward, extending his hand, his voice like ice as he declares that for the insult she hurled at Lady Litty, she will reap exactly what she has sown. Sensing the wrath closing in on her, she falls completely, her forehead pressing hard against the floor as she pleads to be forgiven for her foolishness this time. She continues, not daring to raise her head. Only this time, she swears on everything, she'll never repeat such a mistake, never again cross that line, so please, she begs, spare my life. The Duke lets out a sigh. Turning away, he tells her to never forget his words, noting that there will be no second chance. Finally, she lifts her head with slight relief and quietly thanks him. But his commands don't end there. He instructs her to tell Artois to destroy every remaining painting immediately, and reminds her that creating new ones is strictly forbidden. She agrees, but cautiously adds that Finn might refuse to comply. The Duke turns, his gaze sharp, and asks if that means she intends to defy his order. Startled, she tries to explain that isn't what she meant, but he cuts her off and leaves her with one final warning. If you dare disobey me, you'll be punished, both Artois and you. She falls to her knees once more, her voice low as she says she understands. The Duke extends his hand, and the wall of fire dissolves instantly. But the moment she lifts her head and meets Litty's gaze, something inside her twists. Litty gently calls her name, but instead of calming her, it sparks a deeper fury. What's with that look? Is she pitying me? Her expression hardens as she gets to her feet, she bows stiffly to the Duke, then turns to Litty. Her words are laced with hate, saying that while there's a lot she wants to say about her, she has an appointment with Lord Clyde. Before turning away, she throws her a venomous glance, sharp and deliberate. Then she storms out, her heart pounding, teeth clenched in rage. Until I see your downfall with my own eyes. I will never give up. But with that monster around, it's pointless. I'll have to strike from the sidelines. But Brew, didn't this just almost get burned? After Michelle storms out, the Duke finally turns to Litty, his voice softer now as he asks if she's all right, but she only stutters, lips parting, unable to form a full response. He continues, saying it must be painful, being betrayed and trapped by her own sibling. She breathes out his name gently, eyes welling up, just hearing someone acknowledge that pain makes her feel like something inside her is being seen for the very first time. But then the thoughts creep in. I'm only here because of the contract, and I come from a noble house that sees Lord Evarista as nothing more than a monster. She lowered her gaze, her words falling out quietly. Even so, despite being someone like this, you still believed in my purity, thank you. The Duke brightens with a cheerful smile as he softly calls her name, affirming without hesitation that of course he believes her. He adds that ever since they've been together, he's come to see just how sincere and determined she is to keep surviving, despite everything. She lifts her eyes to him, quietly staring, her chest feeling lighter, but he doesn't stop there. He admits that perhaps he took things too far today, taking advantage of her shock and inability to act. He even confesses that he somewhat mismanaged his magical power. Then, looking at her more seriously, he asks, "Are you also afraid of me?" He reflects inwardly, how reading the emotions left behind in that painting stirred something deep and chaotic inside him, making it harder to control his power, letting it surge more than necessary. But then he hears her calm voice. She admits she was indeed surprised, but not for a moment did she feel fear. He glances at her, but only replies that she shouldn't hold back. He continues saying, if anything, compared to her, he truly is a monster beyond reason. However, she cuts in quickly, pleading for him not to say such things, reminding him of how even the fire he summoned around Michelle was just an illusion. With unwavering resolve, she goes on, her eyes clear, and you had no intention of harming her, right? The Duke is left speechless by her words, momentarily stunned, but then a soft smile gently forms on her lips as she continues. She admits she even touched the fire directly, and felt no burns at all. Startled, the Duke immediately asks if she truly touched it, his voice laced with concern as he questions why she would do something so reckless without knowing whether it was real. But she answers with a steady voice, her expression calm and certain. She says it was because he could use magic without chanting, so she figured he had intentionally made it look real. And more than that, she adds, she's already come to understand that he isn't the terrifying being others make him out to be. I truly believe that. Then she lowers her gaze, and though it pains her to admit, she softly tells him that her relationship with Michelle may already be beyond repair. Even so, she adds, Michelle is still her younger sister, so she's truly grateful for the kindness he showed. The Duke then tells her that even if it truly was just an illusion, it doesn't change the reality that he wields magic far beyond what any human can control, so letting her guard down so easily would be unwise. Flustered, she immediately apologizes, worried that her words may have been too forward, and pleads for forgiveness. But he gently clarifies that it's not that at all. In fact, he says, he's genuinely happy, because she chose to believe in him. Then, as his hand tenderly brushes against her cheek, he softly confesses, the words slipping out before he can stop them, I just worry about you. As their eyes linger on each other, a quiet warmth passes between them, the moment feels fragile, almost sacred. But just then, a voice from outside shatters the stillness. Can I come in? They both turn toward the door, only to see Julius step inside. With a dramatic pout, he mutters, our meeting time is already over, you know. But the Duke doesn't return the light tone. Instead, his eyes narrow, his gaze sharpening as a coldness seeps into his voice. Since when have you been standing there? Julius playfully asks what's wrong, teasing that his face looks a little scary. Then his expression shifts to seriousness as he brings up how whenever he pulls pranks or mischief like that he simply laughs and forgives him. A grin tugs at his lips as he points out that the Duke's getting anxious. Then, leaning in closer, he lowers his voice to a whisper. Whether I saw the painting or not, is that what's making you so uneasy? You were so panicked, you didn't even realize I was here, so I guess you could say that the painting really is beautiful, even if it is only just in imagination, right? Met with the Duke's stern gaze, he quickly laughs it off, assuring him there's no need to worry, he didn't see anything. But he doesn't stop there. With a casual shrug, he adds that even if he had, he wouldn't feel that way about a sacrifice, that's just the kind of person I am. Litty appears and apologizes, noting that their appointment time has already passed, but he simply responds that it's all right, he knows it wasn't her fault. Then, picking up the paper, he says they should go ahead and finish the blood test and medical interview quickly. According to the blood test results, she falls into the category of having excessive magical blood, with a very high concentration of magic. As a result, the symptoms are quite severe and if left untreated, they could lead to death. However, as long as she remains a sacrifice, her health is expected to remain stable, and moving forward it seems she only needs to undergo checkups every 6 months. She thanks Julius for his assistance, but his expression turns serious as he reminds her that it also means she'll have to spend the rest of her life as Evarista's sacrifice. After all, even the Duke needs to consume live blood to survive. A heavy silence falls between them as her thoughts begin to spiral. Sacrifice. That's right, if Lord Evarista stops drinking live blood, his condition will worsen. That's why she's needed. She had known this from the start, yet somehow, she'd never fully grasped what it truly meant to be a sacrifice. Later that night, the Duke leans over her, and without a word, sinks his fangs into her neck. The sensation is swift, and he pulls away shortly after. She doesn't move, just lies there, trembling uncontrollably. Noticing this, the Duke asks if she feels any pain. He gently places his hand on her back to check, but she quickly shakes her head and murmurs that it's nothing. A sudden cry escapes her lips, startling him. She quickly apologizes, explaining that her body feels strange, that it's been like that the entire time. Her cheeks flush with heat as she tries to understand it. The blood-sucking session is over, yet her body remains hypersensitive. It hurts in a way she's never felt before. As she lies there in confusion, trying to figure out what to do, she hears the Duke's voice. He quietly admits that it might be his fault. Surprised, she turns to ask what he means, but he falls silent, as if carefully choosing his words before continuing. He finally speaks, revealing that he's heard something before. When bloodsucking happens too frequently, it can intensify the body's arousal response. She murmurs that she understands, but he goes on, reassuring her that there's no damage being done to her body, and none of it is her fault, though it's overwhelming now. He says with quiet certainty that if she continues, her body will slowly grow accustomed to it. Her breath trembles as she exhales, then she asks if this strange sensation will eventually fade, but instead of a yes he says no. He explains that arousal triggered forcibly will not subside on its own. A jolt of panic rushes through her at his words, and without thinking, she quickly asks what she's supposed to do. But the Duke, with an unsettling ease, replies bluntly, it needs to be released with the help of a man's hands. She remains confused, repeating his word, released, trying to understand what he means. But he continues sharply, his tone low and unwavering, by touching her body, by bringing her to the peak of pleasure. He swears he won't hurt her, gently asking if he can touch her now, urging her to think of it as part of the healing process, but she refuses, saying she can't do that. Tears begin to stream down her cheeks as she whispers through trembling lips, I'm sorry. I can't. For a moment, it's unclear what he's thinking, his red eyes glow brighter, his face shadowed and unreadable. Then his expression softens, with a quiet, pained voice, he apologizes, saying he knows it's an inappropriate, impolite request, but there's no other way. She quickly interrupts, her voice urgent, no, it's not like that. Her words spill out honestly, she just doesn't want to trouble him anymore and she doesn't think of it as inappropriate at all. Hearing her unexpected confession, the Duke's pleasant expression quickly returns as he mutters her name softly, Litty. Sweeping a strand of her hair behind her ear, he gently continues, I will never think of you as a burden. Let me take responsibility. As he lowers her onto the bed once more, an unspoken apology passes through his mind. I'm sorry for lying, Litty. Maybe it's because I've started to develop special feelings for you, that the arousal effect has gotten stronger. Without even realizing it, I've started wanting to touch you. She settles on him, and his hand drifts down to her lower abdomen, slow and careful. Leaning in, his breath hot against her ear, he whispers, Don't be afraid. I just want to make you feel better. But even as his touch lingers, his thoughts remain guarded. I can't let her know the truth, because I can't live without her blood. I must not destroy this peaceful relationship. I must not let my filthy desires taint it. I need to suppress these desires as quickly as possible. In her point of view, she could hardly recall what went down the previous night. Overwhelmed with fear, tension and strange sensations, her mind went blank, and without realizing it, she lost consciousness. Since then, ever since her blood is sucked, she's constantly hunted by immense pleasure. In a new scene, she mutters an apology beneath him, but he just reminds her he's told her many times she doesn't need to apologize. Don't think about anything, just accept it. The Duke said she'll get used to it over time, but for some strange reason, it feels like the sensations are getting stronger every day. When can I stop troubling him? I'm here as a sacrifice to help Lord Evarista. I should be able to do this job well. In a new scene, the Duke assessed her work. Once he's done, he informs her he'll go back to the study, asking her to go to the dining table for dinner. As she watches the Duke leave, a thought settles in her mind. Today again, she'll eat alone. She reflects on how the Duke doesn't eat regular foods. She recalls his exact words, even after eating, his hunger doesn't go away and he can't taste anything. Even so, he used to come to the dining room, but lately, he says he's been very busy with government matters. That's why he often returns to his study. Is it really because he's busy? Or maybe, after the incident with Michelle, I've been troubling him a lot, and on top of that I still can't control my desires. I'm a failure of a sacrifice. Mia calls for her, startling her out of her thoughts. She informs her the food is ready and asks if she'll dine now or a bit later, and she apologizes, saying she'll be there shortly. They walk down the hallway, and Mia, sending her worried expression, asks if she's okay. She asks if something's up lately, pointing out that she looks worried, but Litty simply thanks her for her concern. She tells her it's probably because she's hungry, asking her not to worry. Mia speaks, her gaze lingering on Litty, who can't hide her shock. It's hard to believe Mia actually addressed her. A quiet unease twists in her chest. She's always felt that both Mia and Roa didn't like her much, and she can't help but wonder if something had happened. Almost as if reading her thoughts, Mia asks sharply, Were you surprised that I was worried about you, my lady? She quickly apologizes, clarifying that it's not as though she was treating her in any special way. People from Osaka, especially the nobles, tend to scare their servants, sometimes even hurt them. She explains that she and Roa, too, have learned to be cautious. Every time someone new arrives, they can't help but remain wary. Litty glances down, quietly agreeing in her mind. She was the same in the beginning. Despite knowing nothing, she had been frightened too. Mia continues, her tone softening. She admits that Litty has been incredibly supportive of the Duke, and from what she's seen, her master seems more lively than ever lately. So, I'm not really on guard anymore. Litty can't help but repeat the words softly, almost cluelessly. More lively? Prompted by her reaction, Mia offers a deeper explanation. She suggests it might be because things around the household have been running smoothly too, but adds honestly that it genuinely feels like the Duke enjoys talking with her. Litty turns her face to the side, her expression dimming. If that's true, then I'm glad, she says quietly. But she doesn't stop there. A shadow of doubt lingers in her voice as she adds that the Duke is a kind person, suggesting he's perhaps simply being considerate because of her illness and her position. On the other hand, in the Duke's study, Aroe in bat form reports to the Duke. He informs him he snuck into the academy that day and checked out Michelle's Xenadar and Fin Artois but didn't find anything suspicious. As for Artois, he reports that he'd written a pledge himself promising he'll burn the rest of his paintings and never draw again. He adds that he's also been warning the other guys who have a crush on Lady Litty to cut it out, and it seems he's been going around and warning them all. The Duke, confused, simply asks why he would go that far, and Aroe responds that it's because his relatives are in the standing army. He explains that he grew up being told how scary Evariste Lajuz is, ever since he was a kid. The Duke simply responds with a calm remark, saying he understands, grateful that it has spared him a considerable amount of effort. Just then Mia approaches in bat form from the other side. Sensing something off, the Duke asks what's wrong, noting that it's unusual for her to show up at that hour. But she doesn't waste any time, going straight to the point as she asks, "Master, why are you avoiding Lady Litty?" The Duke regains his composure and calmly asks why she's bringing all of that up. Mia explains that Lady Litty has been worried, both about the situation and about him, so she came to report and check in. Interlacing his fingers, the Duke admits he isn't avoiding her. He explains that he'd simply been spending too much time with her before, so now he's pulling back a little. But Mia immediately calls him out, saying that's exactly what avoiding someone looks like. She adds, "Even though you clearly like Lady Litty, why would you?" Roa cuts in with his own thoughts. It's because he likes her too much, to the point it started affecting her body, so now, it seems, he's trying to keep his distance. The Duke quickly interrupts, asking what nonsense they're going on about, but Mia just sighs. Then, more firmly than before, she tells him, in that case, she must urge him even more strongly to stop avoiding her. Isn't it forbidden to mistreat a human woman after engaging in physical intimacy? Mia presses. If she leaves, you'll just end up wrecking your health again, Master. The Duke responds almost quietly, saying he doesn't think she needs to worry about that. But Mia doesn't back down. She warns him that when a young woman becomes desperate, her actions can be unpredictable. She reminds him he's never going to find another sacrifice as cooperative as Lady Litty, pleading with him to treat her carefully. On another day, she escorts Julius in, apologizing for keeping him waiting. She mentions she heard it was urgent, but unfortunately, the Duke isn't around. Julius simply glances back at her, a grin tugging at the corner of his lips as he admits he already knows and he's not there for the Duke, rather he's there to see her. As they walk, Julius casually calls out to her and asks if Evarista's blood has been weighing her down lately, like, maybe feeling aroused around him or something? She freezes for a moment, recalling the Duke's explanation and realizes Julius must have figured it out already. Then he turns to face her, his grin widening as he says he knew it. "It's rough every night, huh?" Her cheeks flush red, and flustered, she quickly tells him that talking about things like that might be a bit too much, but Julius immediately apologizes, assuring her he didn't mean to tease. He explains that he genuinely wants to help with problems like hers, and that he's been working on a special bloodletting method, one that can regulate blood overload without the need for biting. Her eyes widen with surprise and curiosity. "Is that even possible?" she asks. He nods and begins to explain. They've already confirmed that draining both magic and blood together helps settle the symptoms. But to create a method specifically for hematomagic overload syndrome, he says he'll need her help. Confused, she asks what he means by assistance, and that's when Julius finally reveals the real reason for his visit. He's come to request her cooperation. "From now on, would you let me check your blood and other fluids regularly at the lab?" Her face lights up with joy, clearly amazed by the research. She eagerly tells him she'd love to help, but her excitement fades as her expression turns gloomy. She hesitates, then says she's heard there are nobles and royalty at the research center. Wouldn't they be uncomfortable with someone like me, a sacrifice, showing up there? She drifts into deep thought. Of course, if that bloodletting method were to work, it'll help her condition. It could also give hope to others suffering from the same condition, so she wants to help, but she can't ignore the possibility that if people begin bad-mouthing her, it might end up hurting the Duke's reputation too. "I have to be careful with my answer." Sensing her hesitation, a gentle smile forms on Julius's face. He reassures her that the researchers will see her only as a patient suffering from hematomagic overload syndrome, nothing more. And besides, he adds, there aren't many people who would think badly of her anyway. Then, as if saving his final card for the perfect moment, he discloses it is also for Lord Evarista's sake as well, so I really want to ask this of you. Just as he'd expected, the mention of the Duke's name makes her pause, her thoughts catch on his last words, for Lord Evarista? He explains that with the bloodletting method, human blood can be preserved long-term, its freshness maintained regardless of whether the donor suffers from magical blood overload. And if that becomes possible, it would mean the Duke could have access to fresh blood anytime without feeding on anyone, he wouldn't need to keep a sacrifice anymore. Her heart skips a beat at those words, and her thoughts catch on the implication, that means, I won't be needed anymore. Instinctively, he asks if it isn't a tragedy for both of them to remain bound for decades solely because of their roles as vampire and sacrifice. That's why he's determined to make the research a success, he wants to set them both free. Her eyebrows furrow, and her gaze dims as a quiet "oh" escapes her lips. She reflects on his words, and deep down, she agrees. The Duke is too kind, and even if her existence causes him pain, he must keep me by his side under the title, sacrifice out of kindness, but that won't be until there's some other cure for his blood disorder. And in the end, one thought settles heavily in her chest. But forcing Lord Evarista to be bound like that, that's just unforgivable. At that same moment, a smug grin tugs at the corner of Julius's lips. Slipping into his usual playful tone, he assures her there's no need to answer right away. Then, brushing a finger lightly against hers, he adds that he'd be happy if she gave it some thought. Just then, the Duke appears behind them. Without warning, he wraps an arm possessively around Litty, leaving her frozen in shock. His cold gaze locks onto Julius as he demands to know what business he had while he was gone. Unfazed, Julius flashes a bright smile and casually replies that he merely had a small favor to ask Lady Litty. The Duke in confusion repeats the word, a frown forming, a favor? Julius then reminds him that he'd mentioned before how hard he's been working on bloodletting treatments for magical blood excess, explaining that if Lady Litty were to assist, their progress would speed up significantly. That's the reason he sought her out. The Duke doesn't respond with words, he just glares at him, his piercing red eyes as cold as ice. Later, Litty quietly stands off to the side, keeping distance while the two men speak in private. The Duke tells Julius he understands, though he adds flatly that he could have waited to bring it up when he was actually present, especially since Litty already has a routine checkup scheduled for next week. But Julius just shrugs, he tells the Duke some things aren't so easily said in front of him. Then, with a grin playing on his face, he adds, Lady Litty is the vampire Duke's sacrifice, after all, because of her position, she kinda has to hold herself back, you know? The Duke's expression sharpens at that and he says with certainty that he never forced that kind of life on her. But Julius presses further, revealing that the truth is Litty seems reluctant to visit the lab, and it's not because she doesn't want to help, she does, but she's afraid her status as a sacrifice might make the others uncomfortable. The Duke then passes a remark, his tone low, it's not as though she would cause any discomfort. He glances downward, guilt flickering across his face, then quietly admits he once told her that many nobles and royals disapprove of the sacrificial system, suggesting that's likely what's been weighing on her mind. Julius waves it off with casual ease, assuring him it'll be fine. He tells the Duke the researchers will treat Lady Litty purely as a patient, someone just cooperating in the study, and if the Duke's worried, he suggests they can always schedule her visits for times when he can accompany her. Still not fully convinced, the Duke mutters that helping out with experiments might make her sick sometimes, and Julius doesn't deny it. He acknowledges the risk, but adds that if the Duke provides his usual aftercare, she should recover just fine. Then, his gaze shifts to the corner where Litty stands silently. A faint grin tugs at his lips as he continues. Besides, instead of being cooped up in the palace every day, isn't it better for her to meet different people at the lab? Don't you think? Julius adds with a cheerful grin that most of the researchers are around her age, so there's a good chance they get along. She might even make friends again, just like in her school days. The Duke doesn't respond immediately. His gaze lingers, thoughtful, almost distant. Finally, he mutters under his breath, "Friends." Then, glancing over his shoulder, he calls out to Litty. He looks at her steadily and asks what she wants to do. He reminds her that the lab isn't like the palace, it's dangerous, constantly. Even if he's there to watch her back, he won't always be able to reach her in time. Taking a step closer, his voice softens as he tells her, if she still desires to help despite all that, he won't stop her. Litty stands quietly, her lips bitten in hesitation and her face weighed down by a heavy, conflicted expression. Can only think of how she doesn't want to cause him any more trouble and worry. However, just like Julius has stated, she cannot endure the thought of binding Evarista to such a state for the entirety of his life. Then something shifts in her gaze. Her eyes sparkle with newfound resolve, and she declares that if possible, she'd like to assist with the research, if he would grant her permission. The Duke's expression softens, a soft smile playing on his lips as he tells her she doesn't need his permission for anything, just do what you want. Julius claps his hands together with satisfaction. It's settled, he exclaims, adding that he'll start preparations that very day if he can. Litty politely thanks him, but Julius waves it off, saying it should be him thanking her. Then, gently holding her hand, his voice dipped in gratitude, truly, your help is appreciated. But beneath that warm smile and gratitude, something else lingers. In a new scene, the three of them arrive at the Magical Diseases Research Institute. As they walk through the facility, the Duke quietly apologizes to Julius for making him come at such a late hour for his own convenience. But Julius simply brushes it off. He assures him it's no trouble at all. After all, researchers tend to stay up late by nature. Litty, however, remains silent as she takes in her surroundings. The facility is far larger than she ever imagined and impressively well equipped. Though it was co-founded by the kingdom, the Research Institute's location is deliberately kept hidden from the public, which means, realistically, very few citizens from the country have ever even seen the place, let alone stepped inside. Just then, Julius pauses and points to a section of the building ahead, informing them that the department focused on the research of demon blood is located there, and casually adds that he's actually the director of that department. Litty thanks him politely, but Julius simply waves it off, saying it's nothing. He then shares that the research of demonic blood, he feels it could open the gateway to many other possibilities. As they step into the department room, all the researchers inside pause in surprise. A few of the female researchers greet Julius warmly, but one reaction in particular stands out. A man with brown hair and flushed cheeks stares in stunned silence. Julius then introduces Litty to the team, announcing that she'll be assisting him with his research from that day forward. Litty lowers her gaze shyly and offers a small, polite smile as she introduces herself and says it's a pleasure to meet them all. Immediately, the atmosphere shifts. The researchers, especially the younger ones, are captivated by her beauty, whispering to each other that she's so cute she looks like a doll. Just as someone steps forward, ready to welcome her and explain the day's itinerary, their voice falters and they freeze in place. A heavy presence looms behind her. All eyes turn toward the Duke, his piercing red gaze sweeping across the room, causing the room to fall in great silence. Then Evarista calmly introduces himself as Evarista Lajuz and states that he's there that day merely to escort Litty, asking them to just ignore his presence there. But it's not so easy to do. The female researchers blush furiously, murmuring among themselves about how they'd heard the rumors about him, but seeing him in person, they admit he's even more breathtaking than expected. Suddenly, a sharp voice cuts through their chatter, scolding them for their rudeness. A woman steps forward. She introduces herself as Marie, the head of the department. The other researchers begin taking turns introducing themselves to Litty, and just as the room begins to settle again, another man steps forward. He introduces himself as Leon, saying he works there as a research assistant. Then, with a slight smirk, he says, "It's been a long time, Miss Litty." Litty blinks, momentarily confused by the familiarity in his tone, and as if sensing her uncertainty, Leon elaborates, asking if she remembers winning the top prize in a student council-organized contest back in school. I was the one who handed you your certificate. Suddenly, it all clicks. Then, you must be the infamous Leon Claude, president of the student council. They exchange a few more words, and Litty finds herself slipping into thought again. It feels nice talking to someone she used to work with at school, that she finds that the longing she once had to return is no longer fading, and yet, it remains a cherished memory. As Litty laughs freely beside Leon, the sound of her voice light and unguarded, Evarista lingers a short distance behind, his crimson eyes fixed on her. A quiet ache lingers in his eyes, their crimson depth dulled by something deeply unspoken. Julius, ever light-hearted, strolls over and comments with a playful grin that he hadn't expected them to know each other. He suggests Leon assist with Litty's examination, and Leon agrees without hesitation. With that, the three of them head to the examination room. As the test subject, Litty has her blood, body fluids, and tissue samples collected. Her pulse and weight are also recorded. By the time everything wraps up, the long day has finally come to an end. She sits on the bed beside the Duke. As he brings up the examination, she quickly interjects, her words spilling out faster than intended. It's been so long since she's spoken to people outside the castle, she explains, and although she was nervous at first, everyone was kind. More than anything, she confesses with a soft smile, she genuinely had fun. The Duke stares at her, his lips parting slightly as he repeats the word, fun? She nods, beaming with sudden excitement. Yes. She knows it might sound inappropriate, given that she went there to find a cure, but thanks to Claude, she was able to talk freely about research and magical studies again. Her voice softens with nostalgia as she adds that it reminded her of her days at the academy, when learning was exciting and she truly felt like herself. The Duke echoes her words softly, when you were at the academy, and for a moment, something flickers in his eyes. She turns to check on him, sensing a shift, but he quickly brushes it off with a faint smile, saying he's just glad the visit to the institute meant something to her. She smiles and thanks him, reassuring him gently, telling him not to worry and to continue consuming her blood as usual. He falls quiet, his gaze resting on her, still and unreadable. Then, without a word, he leans in, gently laying her down on the bed. She lies beneath him, cheeks flushed, lips parted, a soft ah slipping out as he hovers above her. But instead of biting, he pauses, his fangs never touch her skin. He simply whispers her name, Litty, his voice low, heavy with restraint and something far deeper. Still, the Duke doesn't bite, he simply remains above her, unmoving, his presence alone making her heart race. She grips his shirt tightly, her body tense, breath shaky, soft moans escape her lips, beyond her control. The tension coils tighter between them, and she can only close her eyes, letting her moans slip out, helpless to the emotions rising within her. Then a flicker of something flashes in her eyes, like quiet defeat as her thoughts tremble alongside her heart. Stop. I can't stand it at all today. The Duke lifts his head slightly, just enough to see her. She's pulled the bedsheet over her face, trembling beneath it, vulnerable and raw. A soft smile forms on his lips, gentle and knowing as he reminds her how he always says that, you don't have to hold back. I just know this dude knows what he's doing. Her thoughts spiral. Lately when I get my blood sucked, I feel like my inner thoughts are spilling out and I can't help but hide them. And yet, somewhere, there's a part of me that's longing for this moment. After that, she began going to the lab once every week. Although she feels sorry for Evarista because he always accompanied her to the research lab, she's even more happy that they can be together. My heart feels so full. Even though it still feels like she's being avoided except when he's drinking blood. 3 months later. Litty returns the book she borrowed to Claude, thanking him and noting how surprisingly interesting it was. Then, shifting topics, she brings up the magical items they discussed earlier. One of them, she says, seems to relate closely to a paper Claude had once published. He pauses, stunned, and asks if she's referring to the piece that was featured in the library's newsletter. When she confirms it, even adding that she genuinely enjoyed reading it, a blush creeps up his cheeks. Rubbing the back of his neck in clear embarrassment, Claude murmurs that he wrote it shortly after enrolling, so it's still a bit naive, and honestly, kind of embarrassing. But then, all at once, he breaks into a bright, beaming smile. Still, he's glad she read it. Their light laughter carries softly between them, while nearby, the Duke and Julius quietly observe. Julius, ever playful, comments that Leon and Litty seem to be getting along well. It's nice to see, and the Duke simply mutters a quiet, right. Leon, catching the Duke's voice, glances his way, then something suddenly comes to mind. He asks the Duke if he can be there, confirming if he isn't supposed to head out to hunt phantom beasts at the request of the regular army, and the Duke, confirming it, tells him he's just about to leave. But as he says this, his eyes drift toward Litty. He doesn't say anything, just watches her for a moment, then turns to Leon and quietly says, "Take care of Litty." Julius nods, offering to take full responsibility and escort her back to the castle, and as the Duke walks away, he thanks him and then mentions that if he can finish quickly, he'll return thereafter. But just as his gaze lingers on Litty once more, Julius lets out something between a scoff and a stifled laugh, an amused p slipping through his lips. Then he suddenly warns. "It's no good if you look at Lady Litty like that. You're making her feel special. It'll be obvious, won't it?" His words grow colder. He tells him to remember his place in the world. That obsession, it's nothing more than a vampire's instinct, a need to monopolize demon blood. He casts one last glance at the Duke before delivering the final blow. "You are not compatible with humans." The Duke calls his name, but Julius only waves him off with a light-hearted "see you later," and walks away. As Julius leaves with both Litty and Leon, a painful smile edges onto the Duke's lips from bitter acceptance. Even without being told, he had always known. He never thought that a monster like himself could have a relationship with Litty. In fact, there is no way to confirm whether this feeling is due to the vampire's instinct or not. But there's one thing he's sure about: things are out of control. I can't deny it. Later that night, Litty finishes her examination, but her thoughts remain elsewhere. Her mind feels distant. She heard the Duke had gone out on a hunting expedition and can only think of him getting injured again. "I need to go back and offer my blood." Leon's sudden speech pulls her out of her thoughts. He asks if she'll be going home with Julius this time, offering to escort her to the director's office, and she agrees. Then, softly, she apologizes for bothering him, but Leon simply smiles and tells her, "We're friends now, aren't we? Don't be shy about this." As they walk side by side, a bead of sweat forms on her face, her vision suddenly blurs, and in the next instant, she collapses. Leon instinctively reaches for her, but freezes when he sees another hand already around her waist. Regaining his senses, he looks up to find her in the Duke's arms. Without a word, the Duke lifts her effortlessly. Holding her close, his expression hardens. For her to be so unwell that she lost consciousness, even her breathing is unsteady. Leon calls out to him, snapping him from his thoughts. With a faint smile, the Duke apologizes for the trouble, but Leon simply shakes his head, saying there's no need. His eyes drop to Litty, and in a low, uneasy voice, he confesses that the experiment might be affecting her health. The Duke, however, remains calm. He tells him he doesn't need to be apologetic, saying he's aware of the risks involved in participating in it. With a pained expression, Leon nods and says his thanks before walking away, leaving her in the Duke's care. After a while, Litty regains consciousness in the arms of the Duke. A wave of relief washes down the Duke, and he asks gently if she even realizes she fainted. Still dazed, she looks up and asks why he's there, and he explains he finished early and came to pick her up. A smile forms on her lips as she ponders quietly, "So that's why he's here." But then, something clicks. Her face flushes, and she apologizes for passing out like that. The Duke chuckles softly and tells her not to move too much, gently reminding her that it's dangerous. "I'm sorry, but you'll have to stay in my arms for longer." She hesitates, but then her gaze lands on the scar peeking out from his collar. She insists he drink her blood, and at first, he's confused, but then he realizes what she means. He nods slowly, saying he was planning to once they got back to the castle, but she pushes on. She insists it must be now, finishing with a soft plea as her voice trembles with worry. The Duke's gaze softens, and taking a closer look at her, he realizes just how much pain she must have been in. She looks so worn out. His eyes shift toward the nearby office door and he gives his answer, "All right." Inside, the couch creaks beneath their bodies as they lie close together. Litty, as always, moans softly under him, her breath catching as his touch sends shivers through her. His hand finds hers, his gaze lingering on hers, she with flushed cheeks underneath him, and he calls with gentleness, "Litty." He intertwines his fingers in hers, then, with another bite, he sinks his fangs into her skin. But something feels off. Far away, Leon holds a glass orb in his hand, watching everything unfold. The sight before him fuels his anger. The Duke's hands move freely over her legs, her dress shifting higher, while she gasps beneath him, tears forming at the edge of her lashes. To Leon, it looks like she's being held down against her will. How could he hold her down and force her? He pretended to be a gentle man, but his true nature is still of a creature that feasts on living blood. As her voice trembles louder and louder, the Duke suddenly lifts his gaze, directly at the orb. Leon stiffens. Did he just see me? And then, the image inside the orb vanishes completely. He panics, wondering why it went blank when something unbelievable comes to him. Could it be that he used magic? That has to be a lie. With just a moment's glance, he released an unbelievable power force. She has someone like that on her side? He's far too dangerous. So that's all for now. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and drop a comment if you want part 2.